Okay, welcome to the Congress Art of Plaster Between Creation and Reproduction, Study and Preservation. We will have here now section 2, Art History and Museology. I am Eduardo Duarte and I will be the chairman of this section. First of all, welcome everyone. And now we have the presentation of Michela Zurla, and the communication will be plaster casts in Renaissance doorways from Genoa in the Crystal Palace, Sydenham, their history and their influence in the 19th century England. I will try to present Michela Zurla. Is at the moment curator of the Palazzo Ducale in Mantova. She has a PhD, in art history, University of Trento, and her main fields of research concern Renaissance sculpture and the spread of the Italian art in other European countries, in particular Spain and France. And Michela Zurla, welcome, and you may begin when you wish.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. I would like to thank the organizers of the Congress for accepting my paper. This paper aims at analyzing the collection of plaster casts of the Crystal Palace in London, Sydenham, a project that was conceived and achieved by the architects Owen Jones and Digby Wyatt in order to illustrate how innovative their choices were and how these choices managed to develop a better understanding of Italian Renaissance sculpture, especially in the different local declinations. Furthermore, I would like to point out the connections to contemporary scholarly researches and to the art market, in particular to the purchases of Genoese sculptures from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. After the Great Exhibition of 1851 in London, a new project was conceived in order to save the Crystal Palace from demolition. The building, designed by Joseph Paxton, was removed from Hyde Park and re-erected in the suburb of Sydenham in South London. This new setting allowed for an ambitious plan to start the display of a selection of casts of the most relevant architectures and sculptures of the past, with the purpose of presenting a complete development of arts through centuries, from ancient Egypt to present days. Casts of different art pieces belonging to the same time period were juxtaposed to create an ideal reconstruction of their artistic and historical milieu, to give people the impression of taking a real journey through the past. As several scholars have pointed out, the Crystal Palace was meant to be a sort of immersive reality that combined learning with entertainment, offering visitors a unique experience. Fortunately, the great number of photographs, especially by Philippe Henri de Lamothe, and other illustrations that survived the test of time, together with the descriptions found in newspapers and publications can give us a clear and detailed idea of what the Crystal Palace looked like. These testimonies are extremely important since the building, opened in June 1854, was destroyed by a fire in 1936 and remains forever lost. Owen Jones and Digby Wyatt were responsible for the creation of the Fine Arts Courts, that is, the different sections into which the exhibition was divided, such as the Egyptian court, the Roman, the Greek courts, or the Renaissance court. Their innovative ideas regarding art history and art as a tool for education made the Crystal Palace a unique experience in the European context. According to their project, the didactic purpose was achieved through the holistic perception of the entire artistic complex and not only through the appreciation of single pieces. The desired effect was to astonish visitors. This new perspective aimed to reach a wider audience, which could also enjoy the pleasant setting in which the casts were located, surrounded by gardens and plants. At the same time, the operation launched by Jones and Wyatt was directed at the contemporary artists, who could find new sources of inspiration for their creation. The examples of the past could give nourishment to contemporary art, especially to applied arts, and elevate the current standards. The presentation of the fine arts courts didn't assert the superiority of a single historical period over others. On the contrary, the purpose was to offer a variety of examples of different artistic forms and ornamentations without a strict hierarchy. The choice of reproductions proves the complexity of their understanding of the history of architecture and sculpture. Even if the combination of the casts is completely arbitrary, the works selected reveal the deep knowledge of various national art contexts. For example, in the Renaissance court that you see in the photograph, works from France or Germany were presented next to the most famous masterpieces of Italian Renaissance. You can recognize the cast of the Bronze David by Donatello here, the St. John the Baptist by Benedetto da Maiano, the fountain from the castle of Chaillon in France, one of the bronze figure of the Hofkirche in Innsbruck, a window from the facade of the Charter House in Pavia, the relief by Luca della Robbia from the choir of the Florence Cathedral, and the doorway from Genoa, and so on. The typology of works is vast and varied as well. Statues, reliefs, doorways, tombs, friezes, details of architecture decoration. Special emphasis is given to ornament, which was one of the fil rouge connecting the entire exhibition and which reflected, as we will discuss later, the interest of the two curators. The different styles of ornament displayed could be taken as models by artists. One of the most modern aspects of Jones and Wyatt's project is that the collection of casts was not connected to academic activities, as it was common during the 18th and 19th century. Academies, such as those in Berlin or Paris, had casts of ancient sculptures that were copied by students to practice the representation of the human body and human expressions. The interest for other historical periods was very limited. So was the attention for architectonic decoration and ornamentation. Instead, the development of museum collections of casts date to the second half of the 19th century. In this photograph, you can see the casts of ancient sculptures on display in the Neues Museum in Berlin since 1855. Another example is that of the cast courts in the Victoria and Albert Museum, which opened only in 1873, that is 20 years after the Crystal Palace, and displayed both ancient and Renaissance sculpture. In order to select the artworks to reproduce and arrange for the execution of their plaster casts, Owen Jones and David Wyatt made a tour through Europe at the end of 1852, visiting several important cities. Their work was made easier thanks to the help of intermediates that aided them in choosing the monuments, selecting the cast makers, and carrying out some practical aspects, such as receiving permissions from the owners of the monuments to be copied. Among the Italian cities that I visited, there was Genoa, a town in northwest Italy that was known for its famous palaces erected during the late 16th century and 17th century, but was almost ignored in its previous artistic development. Jones and Wyatt were in Genoa in September 1852 and got in contact with the most eminent Genoese living artist, Santo Varni. Varni was a sculptor working, among other things, for the Italian royal family, the Savoia, but he was also a fine collector. In his palace, he gathered important artworks, including Roman marbles, sculptures from the medieval and Renaissance periods coming from Genoa and the surrounding areas, drawings, weapons, and furniture. He also devoted himself to the study of local art history and was among the first scholars to improve the knowledge of the Genoese scene. A series of unpublished letters preserved in Santo Varni's archive allows us to bring to light several previously unknown aspects of Jones and Wyatt's stay in Genoa, and helps us to understand Varni's leading role in the selection of the pieces to be copied and the realization of the plaster casts. These letters don't explain how the two Englishmen got familiar with the Genoese sculptor. It is possible that his name was suggested both as a relevant contemporary artist, deserving to be included in the London exhibition, and as an expert on Genoese art. We know that Varni had several contacts in Florence, where he spent the years of his apprenticeship at the workshop of Lorenzo Bartolini, a sculptor whose works were also displayed as plaster reproductions inside the Crystal Palace. Varni proposed a selection of works and a caster, Benedetto Lavagetti, that could make the molds, overlook the entire process, and guarantee casts of fine quality. Another caster in Turin was also involved, but his name is not mentioned in the documents. As we can see from the letters written by Jones and Wyatt, Varni also had the fundamental role of persuading the owners of the works to authorize the reproductions. Among the objects selected, there was also one of Varni's creations, Jephthah's daughter, which, due to some circumstances, could not be copied. Soon the work began, and already by May 1853, the first crates with the casts arrived in London. The shipping continued until September 1854, when Jones and Wyatt informed Varni that the operation had to be stopped and that no other objects would be accepted, since the Crystal Palace had already opened. A list of the crates that were probably ready to be sent is preserved in Varni's archive, helping us identify the casts together with the photographs of the Crystal Palace and the handbooks of the fine art courts. The monuments and architectures chosen by Varni exemplify Genoese Renaissance sculpture between the second half of the 15th century and the first decades of the 16th century. Among these items, we find various doorways richly decorated in the gems and the lintel, which are a typical expression of Genoese Renaissance sculpture, adorning the facades of the medieval palaces in the streets of the city center. Varney sent to London the most relevant specimen of this production, later displayed in the Renaissance and Italian court, as we can see from some photographs of the Crystal Palace. In the Renaissance court was displayed the doorway from one of the palaces of the Doria family, decorated in its lintel with a relief depicting the triumph of the Doria coat of arms, a scene that takes inspiration from ancient sarcophagus. Its pendant is, that you can see here, is another doorway from one of the palaces of the Spinola family that has the same composition of triumph. The frieze above comes from a portal in Via San Bernardo and depicts garlands with putos holding the coats of arms of the Catania family. Another portal, this one, is from the palace that the Genoese Republic donated to Andrea Doria in 1528, bearing the eagle in the coat of arms and adorned with finely executed grotesques. Next to this, we can identify the copy of a doorway in Via Fossetello in Genoa. In the garden gallery were displayed the columns of a doorway originally coming from a palace of the Pallavicino family in Piazza Fossetello. This detail. This portal was made by the brothers Antonio and Michele Carlone in 1503, and it's presently preserved at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Here you can see a detail. It's worth noting that Santovarni too found a copy of this detail of the Pallavicino doorway that is recognizable in a photo of his atelier. In the garden gallery, there were also two monuments from Genoa. They are the monuments of the Lomellini family from the Church of Sant'Eudoro, made by Antonio della Porta and Pace Gaggini, two of the most important sculptors active in Genoa at the beginning of the 16th century. We can see a little fragment here of this monument in the garden gallery. 16th century sculpture was exemplified by two works of Giovanni Angelo Montorsoli, a pupil of Michelangelo, that moved to Genoa and left the city some of the most important testimonies of the Renaissance style. These works, described in the Italian court by the handbooks, cannot be identified in the photographs. The plaster cast of the fountain of the Triton in the so-called Villa del Principe of Andrea Doria was in the Italian court, together with the tomb of Saint Pelagius in the Church of San Matteo. Here you can see the original artworks. Several fragments were also on display in the garden gallery. From Varney's list, we can assume that these were casts from the decoration of the Cathedral of St. Lawrence, in particular from the Chapel of St. John the Baptist by Domenico Gaggini and Father Wooden Choyer. The artworks mentioned show Santovarni's interest in Renaissance ornament that he took as a source of inspiration for his production. As we can see from some of his works, Varney repeats the vegetable decoration of Renaissance models while re-elaborating the composition of certain monuments and motifs. For example, in the tomb of Lorenzo Dufour at the cemetery of Sydenham in Genoa, we find typical examples of Renaissance decoration in the sarcophagus. Here you can see a comparison with the tomb of Filippo Decio by Stagio Staggi in the Camposanto in Pisa, made around 1527. The relief with the two angels holding a roundel is influenced by various Renaissance models, such as the tomb of Benozzo Federici by Luca della Robbia. The resemblance to Renaissance models is even more apparent in these two candelabras by Varney, that copy the above-mentioned columns from the Pallavicino Palace at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Varni also owned a personal collection of casts and worked to increase the variety of the collection of the Genoese Academy with pieces of the Renaissance period. Unfortunately, his collection was dismantled and sold after his death in 1555, and only a few objects can be identified today. Among those, there is a plaster cast of the Hera Ludovisi, now at the Museum of the Castello Albertis in Genoa. Varni shared a rediscovered interest in ornament with Owen Jones, who published in 1856 a fundamental book on this topic, entitled The Grammar of Ornament. This volume is strictly connected to the project of the Crystal Palace, since it consists of a systematic presentation of the historical development of ornament through centuries with an educational purpose for artists. Among the several art scenes taken into consideration by Jones, there is Genoa and the Genoese illustrations taken from Renaissance doorways. As written by Jones in the text, some of these illustrations come from the casts collected under the supervision of Santo Varni, while others are from works that were not copied and probably come from drawings that Varni sent to Jones. This is the case of a portal in the city of Savona, here on the left, and of another doorway in Genoa, which decorates the Palace Grillo Cattaneo and was created by the sculptor Antonio della Porta in 1505 on the right.
Michela, we have to finish.
Yes, just thank you. Thanks to the direct participation of Santo Varni in the project, the fine arts courts inside the Crystal Palace managed to present a more comprehensive showcase of Italian Renaissance, including certain areas of production that remained lesser known or were ignored, as it was the case for Genoa. This influenced not only Owen Jones' conception of Renaissance style and more particularly of Renaissance ornament, but it also gave way to a newly discovered appreciation of these artworks among scholars and museum directors. It's worth pointing out how this was not a coincidence. The sculpture collection of the South Kensington Museum was extended with some Genoese works of art just 2 years after the above-mentioned events. Between 1859 and 1861, 3 reliefs in slate coming from decorated doorways were brought into the museum. One with the representation of the Annunciation, the others with the St. George fighting against the dragoon. In 1879, a couple of portals was acquired, which originally decorated 2 chapels inside the Genoese Charter House. The same year, the doorway of the Pallavicino Palace, whose plaster cast was on display in the Crystal Palace, was built. The amazing creation of Owen Jones and Digby Wyatt, the Crystal Palace, had a profound influence on the scholarly field and contributed to the formation of a more rounded idea of Italian Renaissance sculpture as something born and developed not only in the major centers, such as Florence, Rome, or Venice, but also in smaller cities such as Genoa, taking on specific and unique forms. Thank you.